Hello, welcome to another edition of the Wiseguy Show right here on the Writer Albert Lanier channel and also on YouTube. I'm not a wise guy, but for all intents and purposes, right here on YouTube, I serve as one. Now it's time for an early edition. Normally, this would be done on a Sunday, but it's a Saturday because of some of the early games. So this week is just going to be covering the early games, and I'm not going to get to the games on Sunday and Monday. So it's going to be a kind of unusual week this week because of some of the early games, and because I think some of the early games were so good and so important that I think they needed to be covered a little bit more extensively. So we're only going to be dealing with a few games. I only deal with a few games on this show anyway, so let's get cracking. Let's talk about the games. Three pretty important games on Thanksgiving. Normally, when it comes to Thanksgiving, one of the two games might be important in regards to a division or trying to make it to the playoffs. It has a relative importance. This year is very different. All three of the games had carried some burden or weight with them. And you could say in descending order, but so you had three games on Thanksgiving Day, Thursday, and there was a Black Friday game. And I think that's a relatively important game to look at as well. So let's start with the Packers-Lions game. I think that was the early game. And this turned out to be a good contest. In fact, I think all the games were pretty good for the most part on Thanksgiving. But the Packers-Lions game turned out to be a good, solid offensive contest. Now, I wasn't sure. I was wondering if this would be mostly a defensive affair, whether they might be a lower scoring game because of that. But it turned out to be pretty much higher scoring, maybe not the highest scoring, in the 20s. So, that's significant. It's getting slowly into the higher category. And I think the thing about this game with the Packers and the Lions, both of them are chasing the Chicago Bears. Now, if anybody who's followed the NFL, I think anybody who's not only followed the NFL, but anybody who has also looked at maybe say that division, that NFC division, they'll know that the Bears are never in that conversation. They're never in that conversation. In fact, the Bears have done quite poorly in that division. And it's been, of late, the Lions or the Packers. And now both the Packers and Lions are chasing the Chicago Bears. And I'll get to them. I'll get to them in a matter down the line here. But both these teams were about, 7 wins or so. And both of these teams have had, it's been a little rocky at times for the Packers. They lost Kraft, their tight end, a really good tight end, who's gone for the season. And the thing about the Packers is this. This is the thing that I've noted about the Packers. What I've noted about the Packers is this. At the beginning of the season, their defense played well, and they reduced teams. They're playing the Lions, and they're playing the Washington Commanders. And they kept those teams from scoring extensively. They kept them to below 20 points. They really did a good job. That defense did a good job. But it got exposed when they played Dallas and they had to settle for a tie. And so they gave up 40 points to Dallas. And that's when I knew that defense was not going to be a juggernaut, A, and B, not going to be the factor. And so what I've said about the Packers is the offense has to lead. If the Packers are going to get into the playoffs and have any success in the playoffs, their offense has to come through, and the burden has to be on them to be able to win games. I think having Micah Parsons on the Packers is an insurance policy. And that's the key. It's not he's not going to perform and get 5 sacks per every game that he's in. But when the time comes down and he can make a play, as he did when the Packers were playing the Giants, and he sacked Jameis Winston at the end, he can help win games. Here in this game against the Lions, the Packers offense just had I think, an excellent game. Jordan Love was able to pass downfield, especially midfield and deep, and hit his receivers. And they used the run effectively. Josh Jacobs. They used the run effectively at the beginning of the game and then started passing. The passing game started getting into effect, and they started passing extremely well. In fact, I would say that this Packers offense, again, was lost a major player or two. This Packers offense has, it's had good games and it's had not so great games. It really hasn't been as consistent, kind of like the Philadelphia Eagles. Their games. I think this is one of the best games that I've seen. This is one of the best games I think I've seen in regards to the in terms of the offense of the Packers. Not only they were able to pass effectively down the field, they used the run fairly well at the beginning. They didn't stick with the run as much throughout the game. But they passed effectively against the Lions, and the Lions defense could not stop the Packers, which was a surprise. When the Packers offense gets hot, sometimes they get really hot. Look at the second half of the Pittsburgh Steelers game. That offense was on fire for the Packers. So I think this was their best offensive game, one of their best games, period, but one of their best offensive games. That, I think, in the Steelers game. That's what they need to do if they're going to have a chance in the postseason. I don't really think that the Packers are going to have much of a chance. If they make it to the postseason, I don't think they're going to have much of a chance. Although if they play like this, they'll win a game, maybe, possibly. But I don't think they're going to have much of a chance in the postseason, personally. But they did a very good job. And I think the Lions defensively, they've got to find a way to stop teams. They weren't able to stop the Packers, and that's a division rival. But I think the Lions have a good year, but not a great year. I mean, they've suffered some tough losses. The Vikings beat them in their division. And they've had some other losses. And I think that this Lions team, defense has got to step up. They're going to be facing the Cowboys next. They got to find a way to, stop the bleeding right now. I mean, they had a good game here. The offense did its job, and they got points on the board, and they were able to move down the field. And I think they did a good game against the Giants. They played a good game against the Giants, though it was a close game. They won a nice close game in that game. But I think right now, the Packers had, I think, about as good an offensive game as I've seen this season. So it was a nice game for Green Bay. Now, we got the game that I think was the most talked about game of the 3-game day, certainly the 3-game series of the day, which was the Dallas Cowboys and the Kansas City Chiefs, or the Kansas City Chiefs, the Dallas Cowboys. This was this was subject to a lot of hype, a lot of talk, a lot of, this is going to be the highest watched game of the season. Maybe, maybe not. I haven't seen the numbers. What I do know is this was a nice, tight, solid offensive contest. Again, when you look at the Packers-Lions game, again, it's nice that they were nice, solid offensive contests, right? Not heavily defensive, not low scoring, not sluggish. Some scored, some lead changes at times, a couple times. And the Chiefs kept up with the Cowboys offensively. They were able to get points on the board and they were able to score, especially near the end. I think ultimately when what I said Dallas needed to do was score and keep scoring. To a certain extent, they were doing that. To a certain extent. Not on every series, but they were able to do that. I think what's important was that defense of the Chiefs could not stop the Dallas offense. They just could not. And Dallas put up over 30 points to win this game. And I think this is pretty much what I imagined it would be. I thought it would be a lot more dramatic because I thought that the Chiefs would be extremely desperate. But this was a nice, solid, sometimes up-tempo offensive contest. And it certainly was worth watching. Again, I don't think it was as dramatic as the Giants game that was played at AT&T Stadium this season or the Green Bay Packers game. I don't really think it was, but I think it was a good game. It was an excellent game. And I think you look at this Cowboys team, it's a different team. It's a different team. You look at their last three, include this victory. This is a very different team. Once they came off the bye, they had lost to the Cardinals. Had they won that game, at least they would have had, a little bit something to deal with in possibly trying to make it to the playoffs. But statistically, once they came once they came off that bye, this became a different Dallas team. Of course, they had Williams in the trade. They had, I think, Logan Wilson in the trade as well. You had Overshown coming back. So you have some defensive players coming in. But the reality is this is a Cowboys team that would have, had this team been this way earlier this season, they may not have been 3-5. And now they're 6-5. I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs, but I think Dallas has a chance to build something for next year. And I think that's going to be the important thing. I think that's the real important thing. Just get a decent record this year and, and I think work on next year. Do I think that Dallas is going to make it to the playoffs? I think it's very slim. Personally, I don't think so. As a fan, I don't think so. But as an analyst, I'm looking at I'm saying they have a very slight chance of possibly making it if things work in their favor. Bengals Ravens. Now, this was the most interesting game to me of the three games of the Thanksgiving game. The Chiefs Cowboys was great game to watch, but this was a more interesting game to watch, the Bengals Ravens. And the reason why it was the most interesting game is because the Bengals looked like a different team with Joe Burrow back as QB1. This was a team that just seemed as if they, it just seemed like a whole different Cincinnati Bengals team. The Bengals defense has easily been the worst in the NFL. The worst that I've seen. This is a Bengals team offensively that can put points on the board. Even with Joe Burrow out, they've been able to be quite successful offensively in moving down the field, being able to get touchdowns, being able to get field goals when they can, and being able to possibly win games only to lose it because of either poor offense or poor defense or no defense. And here, the defense of the Bengals woke up. They got 5 turnovers, 5 from Baltimore. I don't even think, I can't recall they've had at least, maybe they got 1 in a game or something. I can't recall, but maybe they've had 1 or 2 in a game or something like that. I haven't kept track of the stats on turnovers for the Bengals for obvious reasons. But the Bengals got 5 turnovers in this game, and they really reduced the Ravens' offense and made it anemic. Then the Ravens scored a couple touchdowns. But this offense really could not compete, not just with Joe Burrow, but with the Cincinnati Bengals. For the first time, they played complementary football. They were effective defensively, and they were effective offensively, both sides of the ball. And this is, again, just like I mentioned, it's a very different Dallas team. This is a very different Bengals team in this game. Now, whether this will continue, I have no idea. But it's something about Joe Burrow. It's something about Joe Burrow. When this guy comes back to play, it's almost like that entire team comes alive. They wake up and they perform at levels they weren't performing at with Joe Flacco as QB, as decent as Flacco has been at times. And so it's a very interesting team. And I think the Ravens, the Ravens have been one of the most overrated teams. The Ravens are one of the most overrated teams. They're the subject of hype, just like the Chiefs have been. People that keep talking about the Chiefs. The Chiefs are basically a mediocre team that have had a good record for about a minute, and they're still mediocre. They're not a good team this year. Sometimes they can play well, but for the most part, they're a middling team. The Ravens are a poor team that have been playing well of late. I saw that from the very beginning when they racked up 40 points against the Bills in the first game and lost to them. You look at this Ravens team, and this is a team that isn't ready for prime time, and they're not ready for the playoffs. I don't care what anybody has to say. This team isn't ready. Lamar Jackson is 100%. He's come off the injuries, but he's not 100%. And they've done what they normally do to Baltimore, what teams do to Baltimore, is they reduce Lamar Jackson to a insignificant one-dimensional quarterback. And they're able to not only get picks off of him, but they're able to make him completely redundant and inefficient. Or, largely not as efficient. So this was an interesting game. Now, this will have more of an impact on the Ravens because they've won about 5 games and finally got a winning record. Now they're about even. So it's going to be interesting to see what Pittsburgh does against the Bills. Finally, we get to Bears-Eagles. This was another interesting game. Again, I found the Bengals and Ravens game and the Bears-Eagles more interesting. The Eagles are a dysfunctional team. Their offense just sometimes is effective and sometimes isn't. It's too inconsistent. And they weren't as consistent here. They actually did a better job against Dallas. They scored 3 touchdowns. I think they'd scored a couple touchdowns here. But they did a better job against Dallas, even though they ended up losing that game. The Chicago Bears are now at a point, and I said this before, I'll say it now. They won the fluke games. They won the lucky charms games, you could say. They won by luck and reversal of fortune previously. They did it with the Raiders. They did it with the Commanders. They did it with the Bengals. In some respects, you might say they did it with the Giants. Now they're beginning to win the games outright, just through solid football, where the Vikings ran the ball, got in scoring position, and did the field goal to win. It kicked the field goal to win. You look at the Steelers defensively; they didn't have the ball, but defensively, they managed to stop the Steelers to prevent them from losing. And the Bears now use their offense like a scalpel, and more specifically, the offensive plays, the rushing plays. They use the rushing plays like a surgeon using a scalpel and cutting through the swathe or swath, however it's pronounced, of the Eagles defense. That defense could not stop that run. And the way they use Swift and they used to be their rookie, both got 100 yards. This is what I was looking for the Bears. I was looking for them to use the run as a weapon. They finally have done it in this game against the Eagles. It was a nice game plan in that regards. They kept running the ball and efficiently running the ball. And they didn't have to rely on Caleb Williams to necessarily bail them out, as he partly has through some nice throws and efficient throws in the fourth quarter. So the Bears are now, I think they got about 9 wins now. It looks like they might win that division. We'll see. But it looks like they may win the division. It certainly looks like they may be going to playoffs. This Bears team is turning it around, just like I said with the Patriots. I said with the Bears too. This team is becoming a dangerous team. I said this before. Again, I said this when I was on the Writer Report. Check that out, mixlr.com. It's also on YouTube. But what I said is, when you play the Bears, you cannot allow them to have the ball in the fourth quarter. If they're down by 3 or even 7 in the fourth, and they even have less than a minute, they can get down the field and they can score. And that's one of the reasons. That's one of the ways. And even when they didn't get the ball, when the Steelers were playing, the Steelers did a pretty good job playing the Bears. They still stopped them. This Bears team is becoming dangerous. And I'm in danger of extending over my time. And that's it for another edition of the Wiseguy Show. So tune in next week to another edition of the Wiseguy Show, the show getting you wise about what's happening in the NFL right here on YouTube. Bye, folks.